Natalie's car rumbled down the dusty road. Blackwood forest loomed, dark and silent. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and deep purple. She shivered, a sense of unease settling in her gut. Natalie checked her watch. Mia was supposed to be here. They'd planned a relaxing weekend at Mia's family cabin. Now, doubt gnawed at her. Maybe coming alone wasn't such a good idea after all. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, pushing down the rising fear. The woods grew denser, swallowing the last rays of sunlight. Shadows stretched out like grasping claws. She pressed on, hoping to find the cabin soon, hoping to find Mia. The car headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the dirt path ahead. Trees pressed in on either side, their branches twisting and gnarled like skeletal fingers. The forest seemed to hold its breath, watching her, waiting. Natalie rolled down the window, hoping for a breeze, a break in the suffocating silence. But the air hung heavy and still, thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. A shiver ran down her spine. She drove slowly, her headlights catching glimpses of movement in the undergrowth. Just a rabbit, she told herself, or a squirrel. But fear whispered in her ear, painting monstrous shapes in the shadows. Why hadn't Mia answered her calls? Where was she? Natalie's heart pounded against her ribs. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. Finally, through the trees, she saw it, the cabin. It stood at the end of the path, a dark silhouette against the dying light. Relief washed over her, quickly followed by a fresh wave of unease. The cabin looked different than she remembered, more run down, more sinister. Natalie parked the car, her hand trembling as she turned off the ignition. Silence descended, heavier than before. She stepped out of the car, her breath catching in her throat. The air felt colder here. Damp and heavy, the cabin's windows were dark, like empty eyes staring back at her. There were no lights on inside, no sign of life. A sense of dread coiled in her stomach. Where was Mia? As Natalie approached the cabin, she noticed the front door was slightly ajar. The sight sent a chill down her spine, a sense of foreboding settling in her gut. She hesitated for a moment, her mind racing with possibilities. Had Mia left it open, or had someone else been here? The questions swirled in her mind, each one more unsettling than the last. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. A shiver ran down her spine. She called out, her voice trembling. "Mia, are you here?" The silence that followed was deafening, amplifying her fear. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the cold and the dread that was creeping in. "Mia, are you here?" Only silence met her words. The cabin seemed to swallow her voice, the emptiness echoing back at her. She took a tentative step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The wind howled through the trees, sounding like a mournful cry. It was as if the forest itself was warning her to turn back, to leave this place behind. But she couldn't. She had to find Mia. She pushed the door open slowly, stepping inside. The creak of the hinges echoed in the stillness, making her flinch. She paused, listening for any sign of life, but there was nothing. The air inside was stale and musty, thick with the scent of dust and decay. It was clear that no one had been here for a long time. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Cobwebs hung from every corner, and a thick layer of dust covered the furniture. It was as if time had stood still in this place, preserving it in a state of neglect and abandonment. The cabin was dark, the only light filtering in through the grimy windows. The dim light cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the place feel even more unsettling. Natalie fumbled for the light switch. Nothing. She flicked it a few more times, but the cabin remained shrouded in darkness. The power must be out, she thought, her anxiety growing. The power must be out. She took a shaky breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a sense of isolation, as if the darkness was closing in on her. She had to stay calm, she told herself. This was not the cozy weekend getaway she'd imagined. Instead of a warm, inviting cabin, she found herself in a place that felt more like a haunted house. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that something or someone was lurking in the shadows. She had to find Mia, and she had to do it quickly. Section 5. The handprint. Natalie rummaged in her backpack for her flashlight, her fingers brushing against her phone. Still no signal. She swore under her breath. She felt cut off from the world, isolated in this creepy cabin with its oppressive silence. The beam of her flashlight danced across the room, revealing more unsettling details. Deep scratches marred the wooden floorboards, like something had been dragged across them. There were strange claw marks on the furniture, too deep to have been made by an animal. Then she saw it. On the dusty window pane, a single handprint. It was too large to be hers, and the shape of the fingers was all wrong. It looked almost inhuman. Panic surged through her. She was not alone. Section 6. Nightfall. Night had fallen completely now, and the darkness outside the cabin windows was absolute. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, casting an eerie shadow over the forest. The only light came from the single window of the cabin, a beacon in the sea of darkness. Natalie huddled inside, her back against the wall, her flashlight clutched tightly in her hand. The beam of light flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, each beat echoing in the silence. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside the window sent a jolt of fear through her. The sound seemed amplified in the stillness of the night, each one a reminder of her isolation. She tried to rationalize her fear. There had to be a logical explanation for everything. Maybe it was just the wind or the old cabin settling. She took deep breaths, trying to calm her racing thoughts. The claw marks could be from a wild animal, perhaps a bear or a mountain lion had wandered too close. She had read about such encounters in the area. The handprint may be just a prank by some local kids. Kids could be mischievous, especially in small towns like this. They might have thought it would be funny to scare the new girl in town, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Where was Mia? Mia had promised to be back before dark. It wasn't like her to disappear without a word. Why hadn't she answered her calls? Natalie had tried calling multiple times, but each attempt went straight to voicemail. The silence on the other end was deafening. A wave of guilt washed over Natalie. She should have insisted on coming with her. They had always done everything together, and now, when it mattered most, she had let her go alone. She should have known something was wrong. The signs were there, but she had ignored them, brushing off her concerns as paranoia. Now she had to find Mia, no matter what. She couldn't just sit here and do nothing. Gathering her courage, Natalie stood up, flashlight in hand, and prepared to venture into the night. She had to find Mia, and she had to do it now. Section 7, Shadows and Sounds. Time seemed to crawl by. The silence of the cabin was broken only by the sound of her own ragged breathing. Each breath she took seemed to echo in the oppressive stillness, amplifying her sense of isolation and fear. The darkness around her felt almost tangible, pressing in from all sides, and the occasional creak of the old house settling around her. Shadows danced at the edge of her flashlight beam, taking on sinister shapes in her fear-heightened state. Every flicker of light seemed to bring the shadows to life, morphing them into grotesque figures that loomed and leered at her from the corners of the room. Then she heard it, a soft tapping sound coming from upstairs. It was faint, barely audible, but it was enough to send a shiver down her spine. She strained her ears, trying to catch the sound again, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. The tapping was rhythmic, almost deliberate, as if someone or something was trying to get her attention. Her grip tightened on the flashlight. Was it just the wind, or was it something else? The tapping came again, more insistent this time. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. The sound was closer now, more defined, and it was definitely not the wind. It was a deliberate, purposeful sound, like someone tapping their fingers on a wooden surface. It was definitely footsteps. Someone was up there. Fear coiled in her stomach, cold and sharp. She could almost hear the soft thud of each step, the creak of the old wooden floorboards under the weight of an unseen presence. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Was it an intruder, a ghost, or something even more sinister? She had to get out of here. Panic surged through her veins, propelling her into action. She turned and bolted for the door, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly with each frantic step. The forest outside was no less terrifying, but it was her only chance. She could feel the presence behind her, closing in, and she dared not look back. Her only thought was to escape, to survive the night. Natalie stumbled back from the foot of the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. She considered making a run for the front door, but what if whoever was upstairs was blocking the way out? She was trapped. The footsteps were getting closer now, heavier, accompanied by the sound of something dragging across the wooden floor. A low growl vibrated through the air, sending a fresh wave of terror through her. It was like nothing she had ever heard before, primal and filled with malice. The flashlight trembled in her hand, its beam dancing erratically across the ceiling. She had to get a grip. Panicking wouldn't help, but the fear was a living thing inside her now, threatening to consume her. Taking a deep breath, Natalie shone her flashlight up the stairs. The steps creaked ominously under the weight of whatever was coming down. She held her breath, her finger hovering over the flashlight switch, ready to blind whatever creature was stalking her. Then it emerged from the shadows. A tall figure, shrouded in darkness. It moved with an unnatural grace, its eyes glowing an eerie green in the darkness. A low growl rumbled in its chest, the sound sending chills down her spine. Terror rooted her to the spot. She couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The creature took another step toward her, its eyes boring into her soul. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the end. A moment stretched into an eternity. Natalie held her breath, waiting for the inevitable attack, but it never came. Slowly she opened her eyes. The creature was gone, vanished. She shone her flashlight around the room, her heart still pounding in her chest. The cabin was empty. Had she imagined the whole thing? Was her fear playing tricks on her? She didn't know what to believe anymore. Natalie stumbled back against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, her legs shaking too badly to support her weight. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the tremors that racked her body. Then she heard it again, a soft chuckle close to her ear. It was a chilling sound, filled with amusement and something else, something cold and cruel. Natalie whirled around, her flashlight beam catching a glimpse of movement outside the window. Two glowing green eyes stared back at her, filled with a malevolent joy that sent a scream tearing from her throat. She scrambled back, her back hitting the wall, her eyes fixed on the window. But the eyes were gone. Just like the creature, they had vanished into thin air. Natalie was alone, truly alone, and whatever or whoever was haunting Blackwood Forest cabin wasn't finished with her yet.